but wanted to mention that again, Integra LifeSciences, sponsor of today's conference, is a leading global medical technology company dedicated to limiting uncertainty for clinicians as they can concentrate on providing the best patient care. In 2017, Integra LifeSciences completed the acquisition of Codman Neurosurgery from Johnson & Johnson, making the newly branded Codman Specialty Surgical Division of Integra LifeSciences one of the largest and most relevant neurosurgical, focused companies in the world. Codman Specialty Surgical's investment in product innovation allows them to provide more healthcare solutions to surgeons and their patients worldwide. A focus of Codman Specialty Surgical is in the hydrocephalus space, where they develop new innovation, focus on research, and also partner directly with neurosurgeons and neurologists to support important education initiatives. Leslie Parks is the head of marketing for Integra Canada and has led this division since 2015. Leslie began her career in New Zealand in medical affairs, followed by a transition to sales and finally marketing with a move back to Canada 7 years ago. In marketing, Leslie found her passion for helping patients, supporting medical professionals with innovative technology, and working with clinical thought leaders, supporting new best practices with improved patient treatment in the neurosurgical space. So with that said, I now hand it over to our next speaker, Leslie Parks. Thanks, Leslie.
Okay, great. Well, as mentioned in the intro, my name is Leslie Parks. I'm the head of marketing for Integra Canada. I'm really excited to be here today, and a big thanks to Hydrocephalus Canada for allowing us this opportunity to speak with you today. I'm going to start by giving you a quick overview of Integra. I don't think a lot of people know who we are, so we wanted to introduce Integra, and then we're going to follow that by some shunt basics, and then dive into some of our products in our portfolio. So Integra is a global medical technology company. We've got offices all over the world, and we've got one actually in Oakville, Ontario, which is where I'm based. We have two divisions. We've got our Codman Specialty Surgical Division, which is what I'm here to talk to you about today. And then we also have our Orthopedics and Tissue Technology Division. We've always been a very focused neurosurgical company, but in 2017, as mentioned in that intro, we acquired the Codman line of products from J&J, and with that acquisition, it made us one of the largest and most relevant neurosurgical companies in the world, something we're really proud of. All of our common valves are used for the treatment of hydrocephalus. And you'll notice in this slide, we have a number of valve options that are presented to you. So as you know, hydrocephalus patients are, no two hydrocephalus patients are the same. It's an incredibly heterogeneous condition, and our valve portfolio has been designed keeping that in mind. So the way that we've looked at our valve portfolio is to make sure we have options to help best match individual patient needs with the best valve option to help meet those needs. Okay, so let's get into a shunt system and shunt components. So a shunt system comes in a variety of models depending on which company that you work with, but they always have two very similar parts. So number one, you've got a catheter and catheter systems that will take CSF away from the ventricles and move them onto their final destination, be it usually the peritoneum and the abdominal cavity, pardon me, but also can be taken to the right atrium of the heart. And then you have your valve, and the valve is what helps to regulate that flow. So most shunt systems will have a proximal catheter. So that's the catheter that will go into the ventricle and remove CSF from your ventricle. It'll take that either through a tapping reservoir. That's an optional thing to have on a shunt. If you do have a tapping reservoir, what that allows the surgeon to do is to take a sample and test that sample. But the surgeon or neurologist can also inject fluid into that tapping reservoir to test your shunt to see how it's performing. And then you also have your valve mechanism itself. And so again, that's what regulates the CSF flow coming out of the ventricle, followed by the distal catheter. So that's the catheter that takes the CSF away from the brain and down into either the peritoneum in your abdominal cavity or the right atrium. Those are two very popular areas in the heart. You can also have some optional accessories with your shunt system as well, things like anti-siphon devices. So how an anti-siphon device works is it will limit the impact of sudden increased pressure changes. So perhaps you have stood up really, really fast, or you get into a coughing fit, and you have a sudden increase in pressure, which pushes CSF really, really quickly away from the ventricle and out of the brain. An anti-siphon device will help manage that so you don't feel the effects. Okay, so now that we've covered the basics of how shunt works, or how shunts work, let's focus on the valves themselves and the types of valves. So there's two main types of valves. There's a differential pressure valve, or a DP valve, and then there's flow regulating valves. Within the differential pressure valves, it basically works very similar to a light switch. So you're going to have, when the pressure builds on the proximal, the ventricle side of that valve, as that increases and exceeds the pressure on the distal side of the valve, or the side farther away from the ventricle, what happens is the valve will open and CSF will flow through. There's two types of DP valves. There's a fixed pressure valve, and what that means is it has one operating pressure at which it will open, and then there's a programmable valve. And a programmable valve has multiple different operating pressures that the valve will open at, and that one can be changed in a clinic setting by either your neurosurgeon, your neurologist, one of the residents, or even a nurse practitioner, and they use a special tool that they're trained to use in order to change that setting in the clinic, so you don't have to go back to the OR. With the fixed pressure valves, if the surgeon or the neurologist wants to change your setting, you do have to go back to the OR and have a revision shunt procedure done. Okay, and then let's talk about flow regulating valves. So if your differential pressure valve works like a light switch, your flow regulating valve, the best analogy I have for that is it works very similar to a thermostat. So just like a thermostat is trying to maintain a certain temperature in your house, with the flow regulating valve, it's trying to maintain a constant flow rate through the valve, no matter what differential pressure is going on in the ventricle. So again, it's trying to maintain, much like your house is trying to maintain 18 degrees, it'll tell the furnace to turn on and turn off. The flow regulating valve will open or close based on trying to keep that constant flow rate through your valve. Okay, so let's get into the Codman differential pressure valves. So our valves work on a ball and spring mechanism to regulate CSF flow. All of our differential pressure valves are actually made in Switzerland, the country that gave us precision watches. Each one is handmade, and then every single one of our valves is tested to make sure it aligns to how it was supposed to be designed before it's sent out into the market. Our differential pressure valves work with a ball and a spring mechanism, and that ball is made of synthetic ruby. So the reason we go with synthetic ruby for our differential pressure valve, and most companies that make valves use synthetic ruby, is because synthetic ruby is very, very slippery. So if you have anything like protein in your CSF or anything that's maybe a little bit sticky, it's not going to stick to that valve system and close that valve and keep it closed forever. It's going to slide across the valve and hopefully keep it open. So again, as I mentioned before, what happens with a differential pressure valve, and our differential pressure valve in particular, is as the CSF will build on the proximal side, once it gets to it exceeds the operating pressure of the valve, the ball will unseat from its seated position and it'll allow CSF to flow through the valve. On the opposite side, so once that differential pressure decreases below the operating pressure, the ball will drop back into its seat and the valve will close, and you will no longer have flow through that valve. So as I mentioned previously, Codman Specialty Surgical's valve portfolio is all about choice, where we want to provide as many options as we can to meet the needs of our surgeons, our neurologists, and our patients. For our DP valves, we've got a number of different options. So we have 2 programmable valves, and we also have a wide range of fixed pressure valves. For our 2 programmable valves, we have the Codman Certus Plus valve. That's our newest programmable valve that's on the market. And then we have the Codman Hakim programmable valve. That one's been on the market for quite some time, and everyone, neurosurgeons, neurologists are very, very familiar with that valve. In terms of fixed pressure valves, we have 5 different operating pressures and a whole bunch of different styles to really, again, meet the needs of the patient and the neurosurgeon and neurologist who want that valve implanted. So today, in terms of our valve portfolio, our DP valves, we're going to focus on the Certus Plus, which again is our newest and latest and greatest programmable valve. Because I'd like to focus on it because it has a couple of really neat features that differentiate it and make it a really fantastic option. So number one, it has 8 settings plus a virtual off setting. So the nice thing about the virtual off setting is if the neurologist or the neurosurgeon wants to stop shunting fluid from the ventricles away from the brain, they have the option of using this virtual off setting, which they can turn on in the clinic. So you don't have to go back to the OR for a procedure to turn off the valve. We call it a virtual off because it's not 100% off. It just has such a high operating pressure that it's actually really difficult for you to get up to that level of operating pressure for it to open. So that's why we call it a virtual off. The valve has also been designed to avoid unintentional changes in pressure settings due to strong magnetic interference from things like everyday household magnets as well, and it goes up to a 3 Tesla MRI, which is really, really important. We also recently launched a new electronic toolkit. What this toolkit allows the surgeon or the neurologist or the nurse practitioner to do is to locate the valve in the clinic setting, make a change, and it has minimal contact with the patient, which is really important, especially post-operatively. When you're sore and not feeling great, you don't really want, a device kind of pushing on your skull. So it's a really nice way to make those changes with very limited patient contact. And lastly, we have 3 different configurations of this valve. We have a small one, great for pediatric patients or more elderly patients, a right angle, and an inline as well. Just, again, giving options to our neurosurgeons, neurologists for the right patient to have the right valve. As I mentioned previously, about the fact that this valve will avoid changing when exposed to magnets. Some of you that may have, if you're a patient, you have a programmable valve, or if you're a healthcare practitioner and you work with programmable valves, you'll know that when these valves, it's very important to keep magnets away from these valves because they can have unintended changes in the setting, which can cause an issue for the patient. So again, when we designed this valve, we wanted to avoid those situations. So what we did was we designed it specifically so that it wouldn't react to magnets in everyday life and a 3 Tesla MRI. To be able to show that this actually does work, what we did was we funded a study where we exposed our Certus Plus valve to a whole bunch of different types of everyday magnets. Things like iPad covers, your cell phone, earbuds, even cochlear implants. Just make sure and show that the valve won't change. And in that study, we were able to demonstrate all of the valves didn't change with any of those exposures. Hydrocephalus Association, which is a really fantastic resource, as well as Hydrocephalus Canada, the Hydrocephalus Association actually published an article on this. It's a great article. It's unbiased. It gives you the black and white of the study. And if you'd like more information, I recommend you jump onto their website and have a look at the resources there. Okay, so moving on to the last type of valve is a flow regulating valve. If you remember, I said before that the DP valves or direct pressure valves work like a light switch. And these valves work very differently in that they work more like a thermostat. So again, they're trying to maintain that constant flow at varied differential pressures within the ventricles. And it's working on the concept that normal adult CSF production and reabsorption is around 18 to 30 mils per hour. So that's what it's trying to maintain, that 18 to 30 mils per hour, which is what normal CSF production and reabsorption rates look like in a person. So this valve works in different stages. So stage 1 occurs when the pressure in the ventricles is low. And so when the pressure in the ventricles is low, the valve isn't going to be open very much. So you can see here in stage 1, again, we use ruby, synthetic ruby in our valve construct. And that valve is quite closed. So what it's allowing at stage 1 is about 5 mils to 18 mils per hour of CSF to flow through. As the differential pressure in the ventricles increases, the valve knows, I'm going to need to open more to maintain a normal physiological level of CSF flow. So the valve opens more and it allows about 18 to 30 mils per hour of CSF to flow through the valve. There's also sort of an emergency situation where, let's say the differential pressure in the ventricle spikes. So perhaps the patient's gone from a lying down position to a standing up position very, very quickly, or they've gone into a coughing fit, or they're crying because they're upset, and that's a big, big spike in the intracranial pressure and the intraventricular pressure. When that happens, the valve goes into an emergency sort of stage 3. And so the valve opens completely and it allows for a lot of flow to come through the valve, which will take the pressure down in the ventricle, and then the valve will revert back into either stage 2 or stage 1. So in terms of the flow regulating valves that we have 3 different designs. We have the OSV2, which is designed to allow for about 20 mils per hour of CSF flow to move through it. We have the OSV2 Low Pro, which is the exact same in terms of the amount of flow, but it's just a more lower profile valve. And then we have the Integra low flow valve, and that one's designed to have very minimal amount of flow moving through it. It's about 10 mils per hour. So that's it. That's our Codman hydrocephalus portfolio. Again, in closing, I just want to say a really big thank you to Hydrocephalus Canada for giving us the opportunity to provide this education. Integra is incredibly invested in this space. We're putting a lot of our research and development dollars into new designs and new technology around new versions or new shunts and new shunt accessories as well. And we're very, very invested in education. So something that we love to do is partner with Hydrocephalus Canada and with our neurosurgeons, neurologists, nurse practitioners across Canada to again really push the boundaries and make sure that Canadian patients are getting the best treatment that they can and the most innovative and cutting edge treatment that they can. So again, a big thank you. And if there's any questions, I'm happy to answer.
Thanks, Leslie. There are a couple of questions that have come in. So again, folks, if you have any, you can kind of add to the queue right now. Use that Q&A function and type in any of the questions that you might have for Leslie, and we'll address them right now. And 2 questions from the same gentleman, but I'll deal with them perhaps, Leslie, individually as they're on the same subject, but I'm sure you'll have a little to say about both. The first question was, is the Certus valve approved in Canada, and how long has it been used clinically?
Sure. So it is approved in Canada. It's probably been on the market since about 2015. So absolutely.
Okay, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there. The follow-up to that was, can you tell us whether OHIP approves, i.e. pays for the valve and the flow regulating valves?
Yes, absolutely. So those medical devices are covered by OHIP, covered by every province. Where it might be a little different is surgeons have preferences and they make decisions based on the patient's condition and usually in consultation with the patient. So sometimes a flow regulating valve isn't the best option, and they'll go with a fixed pressure, or they'll go with a programmable, or vice versa. So it's really surgeons have options and accessibility to all the products. But again, it's really making sure that they're picking the right product for the right patient.
Okay, thanks very much. I'll give it just another second here if anybody else has any other questions for Leslie before we move on. And if you do, now's the time to do so. And again, as I've said a few times, I'll remind you for Leslie here and then for our upcoming speakers as well. If anything comes up over the course of a presentation, type it in then if possible, and then we can have things in queue and ready to go. It seems like that was it, maybe, Leslie. So I'll say thank you for your time, and we appreciate it, and have a great day.